been downgraded. So that's now at amber. So otherwise, those are all the same. And on the service risks, these have now gone from well, actually, no, sorry, I say gone from. They've stayed the same as the previous time, but there's been a move around that public health protection has reduced to amber, and one in community services in relation to Hinksey Pool has actually moved into red. So there's also an update on the activity within the risk management group. And that's really it from me. At the appendix, there's a copy of the corporate risk register. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Bill. Any of the members have a question? No? If I could ask, I have one question. I'm delighted that you reduced the terrorism risk to amber, because we've asked for that several times. But the thing I wanted to raise is we have under service risks, we have recruitment and this is amber risk in that. We have recruitment and retention of the workforce. It appears in some form, I think, in the corporate risk as well. I feel that's such a big issue now for local government. I would feel that recruitment retention of staff should be a red risk. And in particular, I would like, well, to ask if the committee agrees. And further to that, I would quite like to suggest that if we could have a brief paper next time about staff retention and this whole issue, because it's always mentioned, but in this, it's only mentioned really once in a specific context and of one service, I think. So I just wonder if the members of the committee agree with me about the need to highlight service and corporate retention of the staff.
Thank you, Chair. If it's only a small number, is it really worth investigating further? I mean, if it's just one service area that's having staff retention problems, do you really want another report done on it?
Yeah, I mean, Helen, she may be on the call, and I know she's here for another item actually, but she may be on the call, might want to comment. But I think it's fair to say that we have a number of services that are struggling to recruit and retain staff, and you know, areas like ICT, for instance, certainly of late would fall into that category, and there are a number of others as well. As you say, Chair, it is on the corporate risk register. It is at amber, basically level 9, so that is moderate. But you know, I take your point that it may be worthy to do a separate report on this. I don't know whether, Helen, you want to comment any more on that, basically, but that might be acceptable to draw one up for the next meeting. But do you want to say, Helen?
Is that okay, Chair?
Are you agreeing, Helen? Yes.
I'm sorry, Chair. Yes. Yeah, I mean, happy to bring, there's quite a body of work that we're doing around this. So happy to bring a report highlighting what the current position is and the mitigating actions that we're taking.
Thank you. I mean, just before I take Ros again, I was just going to point out, it appears in paragraph 9 under business improvement. It starts off retention and recruitment of the workforce. It comes up under regeneration and major profit projects. We know it's an issue with ICT, as Nigel Kennedy said. We know it's an issue with planning. I mean, I think it's a generic issue rather than specific to one service.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, you mentioned it was one particular service. I thought maybe I misheard you. I think the only thing I was going to probably do is, I think I've probably repeated myself actually from previous audit and governance meetings, is that we should, I think, recognise as a council the effect of Brexit's having too on levels of staff and recruitment and getting the right staff to the right jobs. Oxford and Oxfordshire has one of the lowest unemployment levels in the country, and there are several areas and organisations which are suffering from not having the freedom of movement as we had when we were in the EU. And I think we need to recognise that actually as a risk as well too. I don't see the word Brexit, I don't think, mentioned anywhere in this report this time, but I'm going to highlight it again because I think it is still a concern, not just for the council and councils in the area, but also actually for our businesses too. There are businesses who are striving to try and get staff for hospitality and all sorts of things, lots of adverts out, and they're just saying that they cannot get the staff, partly because, of course, it's expensive to live in Oxford, house prices are high, and there's not enough affordable homes, but also because we just don't have the people here to actually take the jobs, which is a shame.
And could I suggest, therefore, that on this item, we obviously note the report, we submit the request for a paper next time on retention and recruitment, and maybe just make a note that this is to include in the context, not just of us, but more widely about the impact of Brexit on the whole county as well as city and the council. Okay, is that acceptable? Does everyone agree? Thank you very much. Now let's proceed. I know that Adrian is under some time pressure. So can we now, Adrian, can you introduce the external audit, the progress on the statement of accounts, please?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Thank you very much. So it's just a very brief update on where we are with the 21-22 audit and also planning for 22-23. So as previously reported to this committee, there's been a number of known issues with the ODS consolidation into the group accounts for 21-22. We continue to be in regular communication with Bill and his team to kind of understand the issues and the progress for that. We're also in regular communication with the external auditors for ODS. And again, we're relying on a number of the procedures they need to perform to kind of report back to us as part of the group procedures, which we've previously reported in our audit plan. We continue to work through kind of some of the other residual areas that are still ongoing as the audit, ongoing as part of the audit for 21-22. I had a call with Bill today, and we've got a status update call next week before we break away to do our NHS work, which will then set out the current status of 21-22, so that when we come back in after NHS in June, we'll be able to pick up the work and hopefully move towards a conclusion of 21-22, subject to the ODS issue that has been going on for some time. And in terms of just the 22-23 audits, I suppose it's just given the committee some assurance that we are still in regular communication with Bill in terms of the normal planning we would do for 22-23. The audit itself won't start until we've concluded 21-22, but Bill continues to kind of come to us with any particular points of concern or any issues he may have in terms of kind of thinking about the closure of the 22-23 accounts, mainly around areas such as pensions and valuations, which obviously are some of the areas which take up most of the time in the audit and also lead to some of the most kind of contentious areas, I suppose. So really that's it. Just wanted to say that as we're kind of still working through 21-22, ongoing discussions around 22-23, and we'll report back to this committee with a formal report in the July committee to kind of give an update status on where we are with 21-22 and hopefully the planning for the 22-23 audit as well.
Thank you very much. I suppose the immediate question is, do you think by July you'll be able to give us something like the final 21-22 accounts?
I think it's very dependent on the progress with the consolidation of the group accounts. There are a number of areas that are going to change as a result of that. And I think from speaking to Bill, there are a number of still ongoing delays with some of the information requests coming back through from ODS. So again, it'll be dependent on what happens with that over the next month or so. And obviously the work then that needs to be done by Ms. Ars to come in and review the ODS accounts as soon as the issues have been resolved. So I think it'll be kind of wait and see. And obviously we'll be able to report back in terms of where we get to. But if we can do the work, obviously, and it is concluded, then we would be in a position to hopefully move through the residual work pretty quickly in terms of what's still left to do.
Okay, thanks very much. I can see Bill has his virtual hand up, then I'll take Ros. So Bill?
So I just realised I was on mute. Yeah, I was just going to sort of really just add to that about position on ODS is that we're currently waiting for information from the ODS finance team. They've sent us some adjustments, but we've got some queries on those. So that's the position there. We have uploaded some information so far, but it's that final position. Once we get that, then we can send the information across to Mazars, who are ODS's auditor, and it'll allow us to proceed with producing group accounts for the council. And because of timing that's involved in the sort of gap between the year end and now, there are other things which we're looking at and we're liaising with Adrian around. For instance, we've had a pension fund triennial review. So what that means is that some of the assumptions that are included in the pensions calculations will have been revised. So we need to do a comparison between what that would have meant for 21-2 with those assumptions and what they actually gave us for 21-2, and then see if there's a material impact. So there's a number of sort of things like that that we're kind of working on whilst we're waiting for the group accounts information.
Thank you very much. Ros, do you want to?
Okay. Thank you for that, Adrian. Just wondered, you mentioned about the consolidation of the accounts from ODS. Is the delay due or linked to the problems that we've had with the QL software? Perhaps that's not a question for Adrian, it might be a question for Nigel.
Nigel will answer.
Yeah, I mean, just in very short terms, yes, a lot of that is linked to the problems that the council have encountered with QL. And although QL, as I've stated before to members, is now at a more business rate footing, certainly the problems sort of went on. There's a tail with the problems that were experienced during 21-2 in particular, and also partly through 22-3 as well, basically. So yeah, it's all connected, basically. And no.
Okay, thank you. That sort of confirms what I thought. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? I think, you know, with some sadness we note the situation. I don't think we can do much more than that, and we'll await an update at the July meeting. So thank you very much, Adrian. So let's note that status report. Okay, let's now proceed. Agenda item 5. And I believe, Yasmin, you're going to introduce this, the audit progress report.
I am indeed, Chair. Yep. Sorry, just getting my documents together. Okay, so just in terms of the progress report, we've made good progress against the 2023 audit programme. We've now completed the following audit reviews. We've got change programme, enforcement restructure, cybersecurity.
Sorry to interrupt you. I can't hear very well at all. I can't hear what's being said.
There's some echo, I think.
Okay. Sorry, is that any better?
Try, let's see how it is.
Okay. Cybersecurity, which will be presented in a private session, and then we've got the housing rents report as well, which I can go through shortly. We will be presenting the follow-up report as part of agenda item 8. And in terms of the remaining reports for 2023 that will be presented at the July committee, we've got the plan maintenance and contract management and procurement remaining at the minute. There was also one change made to the plan. So we're not going to be undertaking the community strategy review, as there's some current developments within the area, which meant that we'd be duplicating the work that we would be carrying out as well. So that review has been removed from the plan.
Could I suggest you speak a bit more slowly? There's some kind of,
sure.
I don't know, sort of echo.
Okay, sorry, I'll speak slower. Are there any further questions? Are there any questions before I proceed to going through the change programme?
Yes, do you want to? Yes, I know. Why don't you? Ros has a question on the change programme, if that's okay, on page 26.
Okay.
Proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So page 26 at the bottom there, critical success measures were not established for all work streams and were not reported to the Change Board and CMT. It gives the summary of recommendations, but the management response, it might be something that Helen can fill in there. It's not printed on the document here. Does it agree?
Oh,
is that it? Is that agreed there, is it? Okay, right, thank you. I won't comment after that one again.
Okay.
Right, do we go on or?
Sorry, did you want me to summarise the report at all, Chair, before
that would be useful.
we ask for any questions?
I would summarise it very briefly because I hope people have at least had a chance.
Yeah.
Because I thought they were good reports, so I don't know. Some of us have read it through, so you don't need to do much more than a very brief summary. Assume it's read.
Okay, I'll assume it's read in that case. I can. So Ros has touched on the first finding. I can go through just the further two findings. So one was around the monthly meeting minutes and formal actions not being recorded. And there was also another finding around council change agents, which are promoting the change programme and new ways of working. The roles and responsibilities need to be further clarified in this area. That's something that the council has recognised and is working on. So those were the remaining findings on that one.
Okay.
I can move on to enforcement restructure once everyone, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Yes, so any other things on the change? No, okay, enforcement restructure, please.
So in terms of enforcement restructure, again, I'll go through this briefly. Two departments that were combined as part of the enforcement restructure. So that was for community safety and regulatory services under one head of service. This was a substantial on design and moderate on effectiveness. So we looked at the governance arrangements, the reporting mechanisms, and the sorts of efficiencies that the restructure brings. In terms of the good practice, there was a detailed enforcement policy in place. Objectives were linked to savings and any sort of significant opportunities as well. And efficiencies were monitored through service areas regularly. In terms of findings, there were two medium level findings. One was around corporate KPIs in terms of how these were managed. These were only managed by one person. And we recommended that further staff are trained to update and monitor the KPI in place. And in terms of the service level KPIs, we have recommended that year-to-date figures are also communicated within the reporting structure, just to give better aid to decision making. Those are the main findings around this report. I'll pause for any questions.
Any questions? I had just one very simple one. I noticed the due date is in 3 days' time, 4 days' time. Do we know whether the everything is done, if you like, because it's very close? Would Helen be able to give us an idea? I don't know who would know. Well, Ian's not on, is he? Can you give an idea?
I was just going to say whether Yasmin knows in the follow-up whether those are on target to be achieved. Yasmin, do you know?
There will be, Nigel. They are on target to be achieved. This report was issued quite some time ago, and when we did catch up with Ian, these areas were in place already. So yeah, they are to achieve the due date. That's all.
Lovely. Okay, let's go on then to the housing rents, please.
Sure. So this was a substantial on design and moderate on effectiveness. So we looked at a sample of housing rent transactions and the debt recovery write-off arrangements in place since being implemented within QL. Overall, this was a good audit review in terms of good practice. Housing rent accounts that fell into arrears were managed well. Housing payments were allocated to the correct housing accounts for a sample of 15 transactions that we reviewed. There were a segregation of duties in place for write-offs and appropriate approvals for amendments to accounts, such as any sort of refunds that were due to tenants. I'll just touch on the main medium findings. So this was around a tenancy account that fell into arrears for nearly about 3,000. The tenant passed away, but there was someone still residing within the property. Whilst the rent account fell into arrears, the contract wasn't drawn up soon enough to cover the arrears amounts, and so this had to be written off. And we are recommended for them to the council to look into the succession policy around this area. And there was low level findings on segregation of duties are required on both housing stock reconciliations and suspense accounts. I'll pause there again for any questions.
Please, Ros.
I have to mention QL again, as it's mentioned in the document there, and it's showing the total arrears amounted to just over 1.93 million in rent, of which is 1.5 million more or less relates to current tenants, and 380,000 to former tenants. And the council, of course, is still using the QL system. So I do hope things get better with that. What I wanted to ask, actually, one of the questions was whether a sample of just 15 housing rent accounts was a robust or sample. Was that a sample size that you would normally use when looking at something as large as this section of local authority business account auditing? It just seemed quite a low number of accounts to look at to me, given how many tenants we have.
So in terms of describing our audit methodology, when it comes to our sample methodology, if we're looking at housing rents, which is seen as a daily control, so this is covering a lot of the population, and we see this as a high risk area, the amount that we usually tend to look at is 15 to 20 samples. We looked at 15, and then if we found any major issues, we'd extend our sample size. So this was right in terms of and just aligned to our sample methodology.
Would you think of going up to say 20 accounts rather than just the 50? As I said, it seemed a bit low to me.
Yeah, if we found
a huge amount of money that is due into the council. Yeah,
if we found any major issues, we would extend our sampling, and we did for the arrears because we did find some issues in those areas. But nothing which, so again, nothing more than the 15, but only if there were any issues found, that's when we'd extend our sample size. And this is just in line with our standards and our policy, that's how we apply our methodology.
Could I just ask Nigel on that? I mean, I know there are different things, because some of these arrears, I assume, relate to the COVID period. And I know we had QL on top of that. And I know for commercial businesses, there was a question we couldn't follow up for 18 months. Was that partly the case for council tenants as well? I mean, how would you explain it? Because it's quite a substantial sum.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, some of these arrears basically would have arisen over the COVID period sort of thing. And given the difficulties of collecting them, I think I haven't got the figures to hand, but I think the arrears overall, certainly at the end of the year, weren't that different basically to the previous years. So which probably indicate more that we've done very well in trying to collect the amount of arrears outstanding. That amount of arrears basically is not dissimilar, as I say, from other local authorities. And I suppose just to come back to Yasmin's question, I mean, it is the methodology for sampling that internal audit use, and as Yasmin was saying, that if there was something found untoward in the sample that she actually undertook, then I'm pretty certain that the internal auditor would have extended the sample actually. So I'm fairly confident in terms of the work that's been done. And as I say, we continue to pursue all of these arrears basically. And especially using the QL system, which certainly in this area is reached that sort of business as usual faster than the work side of things, which we alluded to earlier, which had more problems basically.
I'll just come back. I mean, the difference between 1.93 million and 1.55 million is about 68 million, which isn't current tenants. So is this past tenants? So I mean, this is why when I see these large figures like this to load to the council, I feel in these audit and governance meetings, I have to be asking these questions, even if they are a bit uncomfortable.
The 1.55 million is current tenants, and the balance is former tenants actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that makes the 1.93 million, which is listed in the report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the question then is for auditors is whether you would be looking at that 68 million of past tenants and accounts that would include those. Did any of the 15 accounts that you looked at include past tenants?
Yes, so we apportioned our sample to include both former and past tenants.
I was just going to comment apropos of the sampling. I know that when it comes to payment of housing benefits and all of that, as I recall, the external auditor does take actually what seems a very small sample. The trouble is if one is wrong, then it's scaled up on a massive scale and we get a big shock. So you only need one in a very small sample. Maybe, can you remember, Nigel, offhand? It's not much bigger or smaller. I think it may be very similar to this.
Yeah, it probably is very similar actually. And as you're right, James, in terms of what a typical auditor would do is extrapolate from the sample basically. So if you get one error in 10 basically, then they would apply that 10% error basically across the whole of the population. Yeah, I think that's just the sampling methods of auditors, and I'm guessing it's. And Greg might want to comment. It's the same for external audit and internal audit. That's the way that it's done. Greg.
Greg about to leap in.
Yes, hello, and apologies for being so late. Yes, that is well, certainly that's what external audit would do. As Yasmin said, if we found an error, we would extend the sample and we would extrapolate from that if we felt, you know, that there needs to be some sort of statistical validation to it. Ultimately, we could do 30 or more to get that statistical validity, but we didn't feel that was needed in this case.
Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest, first of all, I'd like to comment. It's very gratifying to see more than one being down as design opinion substantial, which maybe the officers should be congratulated, but the effectiveness tends to be more on the moderate side. But anyhow, well done. And maybe note this report, please, and then proceed to the next one, which is the follow-up report. Now, I don't know how you're dividing the presentation, Greg and Yasmin.
I think I said I would do this one, but Yasmin may support me if there's any detail we need to go through. So you'll see from the follow-up, there have been some progress made, but still quite a bit to do in some areas. So for the 21-22 audits, we've ticked off 13 out of 39 and moved one to low priority, so we don't need to follow it up based on what's been done so far. But there's still quite a number outstanding, particularly in the environment area. You can see there is progress being made, things are being done, but we're not at a stage where we can sign these off as being completed. So there's still a lot to do there. Actually, the performance is better for the current year's audits. We've been able to sign off 19 out of 22 with 3 in progress on income generation. And I think the income generation report obviously had a number of concerning findings. So it's good to see so much has been done in that particular area. But as I say, on environment, I still think there's quite a bit still to do, but happy to take comments or questions.
Thank you. Could I maybe, well, I should ask Mish to come back, but could I just make a very tedious, rather pedantic point, but it would help in reading this. As we get on through this, there are a lot of letters, sort of, they're not even acronyms, you know, they're just letters, abbreviations for various things. If we could have a glossary somewhere, maybe at the beginning of the papers, so that when you see things like NZ something, 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 it's there at least so that we know what it's all about. I mean, that's just an editorial point, but Mish, would you like to respond to these comments on are the due dates realistic? And there are quite a few about environment.
Yeah, no, delighted to respond. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I would characterize it slightly differently. I think we've actually made rather good progress in terms of what was a relatively something of a standing start in a number of areas that were helpfully picked up through the BDO audit in environment. So a lot of this is about getting systems into place which weren't there or significantly amending. So I think some of the important things around that, and I can help you out, Net Zero Oxford Action Plan and Carbon Management Plan are are some of the acronyms there. We've created a sort of overarching master plan document that is being now tracked and reported through the Net Zero Steering Group of Officers, which has itself been given the terms of reference as captured in the progress report here. So I think that's all up and running. We've also got, of course, the Climate and Environment Scrutiny Panel, which ironically is meeting right now somewhere else, and which is now taking updates on progress against that master plan on a quarterly basis. So that's being tracked by scrutiny, how we're actually delivering in terms of that progress. So then turning to the sort of areas which are sort of ongoing, and I think that in pretty much all cases where we've got some sort of actions underway. So I think we are making progress rather than we're waiting to do something. I just sort of cover these off in a few different areas. So one is around costings on the overall carbon management plan. That's a piece of work which we made a start with that, and we had a previous figure that we'd worked up, but we need to go back through with Nigel and team to get a sort of sense of what we think that is against what are now a different set of development costs for doing these sorts of projects. Of course, there are the things like the quarterly reports of the Net Zero Action Plan and Carbon Management Plan should be made to the steering group by action owners. Well, that's actually happening. So I'm on page 55 of the pack. I don't know what specific action number that's happening, but that's done. I mean, we've already been doing that, and we will continue to do that. Similarly, the discussions between the sustainability team and relevant service heads across the area to assign owners to actions. Again, it's done, and it's being reported through in this master plan document now through to the climate and environment panel. So that I think is an area that's already covered off. In terms of the sort of the funding and a log, being able to actually be clear about a log of all external funding. Yep, that's work that's in train, and again we need to link with Nigel to ensure that all areas of funding are sort of appropriately covered off, because not all of them necessarily would be within the sustainability team. And then I think in terms of some of these actions, like the target date for net zero should be clearly articulated in all corporate documents. I mean, it is in terms of new corporate documents which have been commissioned now, but in respect of ensuring that all of our existing documentation is updated to include those dates. I mean, that's a little bit more, I would characterize as sort of, that's an ongoing job that might take some while before we've sort of covered everything off, but it's very much, I'd be appalled if there were any documents, policy strategy documents currently being produced that didn't have those dates clearly expressed. And then there's a section which is actually around the if you like, the sort of the governance of how the council commissions projects, and this is in train. So this is actually being led, and as it highlights on page 56 here, Tom Bridgman, because this is in the area of how we organise our development work, that we properly identify and capture what the zero carbon impacts are for all projects, that we've got appropriate sort of documentation in terms of project initiation documents and business cases and so forth, which does that in a sort of systematic way. We've got a prioritization matrix for capital projects. So there's a suite of things here which they're not directly in my space, but I know that the work is ongoing, and we've had discussion in the development board around those things.
I'm sorry, just Mish, while,
Sure.
I mean, there are a lot with your name against it. I think what we really want to know is, are these target dates realistic? Because you're going through a long list, which are somewhat described here. Are they realistic?
I think that they are, and as I say, in some cases, I actually think we're slightly ahead of them in that I would suggest that with a couple of them, they're actually already completed. So I would say overall they are, and I'm satisfied that across the range of actions outstanding that we're in a good place to get them done. The one I would actually highlight as not being resolved, and it's slightly different in its nature, is there's one around the provision of resources to complete a mapping exercise in respect to biodiversity, which of course is a finance matter, and so that would involve a council spending commitment. So there isn't at the moment resources set against that. We have set out in a cabinet paper earlier this year an approach to developing the biodiversity strategy, and indeed work is underway. But the mapping work that's referenced by BDO will have a cost associated with that, and you know, that's one for a different type of decision about the resourcing.
Thank you very much. Before inviting questions, I notice, I mean, Emma's on the call, Emma Gubbins. You're down 3 times, one of which apparently should be done, another one close to being completed. I just wonder, are we on track for these, Emma?
Yeah, we are on track for all of these. So we have 3 items outstanding now, so 3 items in progress. The first one on this list, which relates to the reconciliation, that's actually now complete. So we have done the entire reconciliation. We know anywhere where there are discrepancies between Aggresso and Uniform. The Uniform system has been quite challenging to get all the information out, so it's taken us a little bit longer than we anticipated. We've now identified any updates that need to take place. We're talking to any tenants that might be affected, and we're aiming to do that by the 1st of May. We'll then update both systems so that we know that they're accurate going forward. The second one on the list relates to procuring the new asset management system. So this is linked intrinsically to the cloud-based Aggresso system. So we need our asset management system to be able to talk to a cloud-based Aggresso system. Otherwise, it really won't solve the problems that we're having. So that Aggresso procurement is happening now. I understand it's all on target. Rocco's here as well, so he might tell me if I'm wrong. But that should allow us to then procure an asset management system in the next 6 to 12 months. So that one is slightly delayed. And then the final one, we have moved that quarterly check on the reconciliation to just before the June quarter date, mostly because it's taken us a little bit longer to do the initial reconciliation, but it also makes sense to do that just before the next set of invoices go out. So we're all on track for those 3.
Thank you very much. I mean, before inviting Ros, Nigel, did you want to respond on the finance funding issue that was raised by Mish?
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of statement that there aren't resources to put that recommendation into practice. And what I can only say is that I'm assuming that in order to satisfy this will come through as a budget bid during the medium-term financial planning process, and members will need to take a view as to whether they support that, basically. So that's what I would suggest we bring it through that route, actually.
Thank you very much. I know Ros has questions.
You. Not questions, I think more comments, actually, if I could, Chair. I mean, I noticed that we have dates crossed through, and it looks like there's been quite a bit of slippage on some of these things with new dates given. And I think Emma was just mentioning that I think 1st of May on one of them for her second one, and it says here the due date is the end of March, in fact, 2024. So I worried about that a little bit, but it is a question that a lot of the dates are, slipping as such, and there are some which are obviously overdue. I don't know if we haven't got it; it's not mentioned as page 60 yet, but there are recommendations which are overdue, and there's sort of several well, 2 dates crossed through, due dates crossed through and new dates put in for later this year. I just wondered if Mish or anybody else wanted to comment on why. Well, private rented sector, project management, most of the project management. I have to say the other thing, Chair, is
we're jumping now to the overdue recommendation. First, we were going in progress. Sorry,
well,
that's
I
all
mentioned
we've
to go
covered.
back to the progress ones and to say that I'm disappointed to see all the dates slipping on these. The other thing I just wanted to say, just as an observation, if I could, we've got this sort of laid out in a landscape thing, but it would be useful. It's just to have maybe a numbering system on them as such, because then when officers are talking about them or we're talking about them, it'd be much easier to identify the paragraphs that they're referring to. Because I mean, you know, there's a dozen or more that say environment all the way down of recommendations and actions and things, and it would be useful, I think, please, if we could introduce another column with just a number next to it, please, for ease of identification.
I mean, if I may say, if we've gone seamlessly into overdue, I mean, James Marriott is down as project management office, or is it? That's what it is, lead.
That's right.
PMO
yes.
lead, anyhow. Several relate to you. Would you like to respond?
Yes, of course. I mean, all the actions featuring are in progress. There's 6 overdue recommendations here. I think I can perhaps summarise how we're addressing those in 2 key points. We have put a lot of work in. I think there's been positive progress in updating our process and guidance. Unfortunately, I myself perhaps underestimated how long it would take us to get to this position. We have been working with lots of other teams around the council to improve our process and guidance for project managers and link in with other policies. So perhaps some of the things Mish touched on earlier, working with the sustainability team and making sure our environmental impact is much more robust in the process. So we've made really good progress in some of these areas, but I'm afraid the final piece of the jigsaw was rolling out training to project managers, and I have had to slip that whilst we were working on the guidance. So I have now booked in training sessions in June with project managers, and we had quite a good response for people, you know, able to uptake those sessions. And obviously, after we've delivered those, I'll then review if there are any gaps there. So that sort of training action sort of picks up, I think, 4 of the outstanding recommendations that are now overdue. I think that whilst the rollout has been delayed, I think we've, in the meantime, managed to improve our process and guidance to deliver a better training package rather than perhaps rush it out. But yes, on reflection, the original dates were over optimistic there. And obviously, you know, very happy to expand and take any questions on that kind of area. So the training is in hand, dates booked in June. I can give a few examples of some of the other pieces of work perhaps we've undertaken if required. And there's another area which is still in progress, which was introducing a more comprehensive lessons learned process. We've always had a lessons learned log, however, it simply wasn't being widely enough used, and it wasn't comprehensive, and it wasn't, you know, assigning actions clearly enough. So we've tried to put quite a lot of effort into sort of embedding the culture around lessons learned, not just at the kind of end of a project for a closure report, but also just capturing those issues as they're raised. Often we were covering things off in business as usual, and perhaps not recognising the extent of the lesson and how we responded to those. So that is still in hand. We will be bringing a more comprehensive lessons learned and action tracking process through both our development review group. We have a subgroup of development board and development board, but we currently have a sort of target date of September. And I'm confident we will be reporting and updating, and obviously take any feedback from development board whether the process needs to evolve further. I think there's always more to do, but I think we put a lot of work into collating more closure reports and perhaps reflecting on some of the actions we've already put in place. Things like recognising we had a risk around market inflation running away. We've introduced a contingency budget to recognise inflation pressures. Effectively, that was in response to lessons learned. So I think now we'll perhaps capture those actions we're tracking anyway more formally in a log, which is something we're about to introduce. So
thank you very much. I noticed the other James Pickering, is down also on overdue and has the dreaded word QL. Do you want to comment, James, on the realism of end of June as your due date?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the final recommendation from our PRS review. What this one actually means is converting a manual process to an automated one. The QL team have now got the system within the test environment, so we just need to complete that testing before we can roll it out I would expect that we would be able to roll that out sort of before that deadline of the 30th of June. Just to provide some reassurance, there are still the checks in place for that. This is about sort of the efficiency of how we're able to conduct those checks in the future.
Thank you. Any questions then? I thought that was quite comprehensive. Questions from committee? I think all we care is that we would like the due dates to be realistic. So we don't see many overdues in the list in future. So let's hope that they are realistic. So with that, may we please note this? Thank you very much indeed. And now we come on to the audit plan and strategic plan we're looking way out to 2026. Who's going to introduce that? Greg, please.
Thank you. As always, the plan has been discussed and agreed with officers. It is linked to your risk register and you'll see it's risk-based. And as always, it will be flexible. So if new risks come up in the year, we'll either add additional audits or we'll agree with you to reconfigure some of them. You'll see that the plan focuses quite a bit on the housing area. There's some work on the private rented sector, again, looking at updating around that, as well as empty properties and selective licensing. We also have some work around planning and building control because there's a number of initiatives taking place in those areas. Health and safety, obviously, is one of the key risk areas. And then QL, looking at the optimisation of that system. So quite a broad-based plan, as well as the normal things around finance and so on. But happy to take comments or questions from the committee on it.
Could I, following on, I think you may just have missed the discussion earlier about red risks and amber risks and you do have under it's number 5, other, including finance ICT, from the corporate plan for next year, you have recruitment and retention. And Helen, who may still be online, if not, it's not her fault because we covered that. But Helen Bishop's agreed to try and present a paper about those issues. I just wonder within the committee, given how it is mentioned, and it's actually been mentioned as we've gone on from that in other contexts, should we try and see if that could be switched with something that is done? Maybe it would upset all the planning, but I feel maybe that should be brought forward, i.e. to now, this year, and then maybe something that is slightly less urgent. But I don't know in terms of your planning and how we devise these priorities, whether that's possible.
As always, we can work with Nigel to accommodate that. As always, it's also a question of timing. So what we don't want to do is look at an area when officers are already trying to take initiatives and it's better for us to wait until those initiatives have been done. So as long as the timing works, then we can agree perhaps to put it at some point, either towards the end of this year or early next year.
Helen promised to have a paper for our next meeting in July, so it would be later on in this council year, but I don't know if the committee agrees. I feel that's an issue which we've upgraded to a red risk, and maybe it would be appropriate, and I will leave it, if that's acceptable to the committee, to delegate to Nigel and you to decide.
Thank you. Yes, I think that seems to be a sensible thing to do, given earlier conversations this evening. Looking down the list for 23-24, we've got health and safety and fire safety under 3 things: enable an inclusive economy, deliver more affordable housing, and under supporting thriving communities. I'm just wondering whether we need all 3 there, and what depth you need to go into for all 3. Would have thought possibly it's quite important under the housing piece to keep that in, health and safety and fire safety in particular. But maybe the retention and recruitment could take the place of one of those in-depth audits. What do you think? Is that an idea?
But it's one audit that we've just mapped it across different priorities of the council.
I'm just wondering, if it's not being in-depth, and it depends. As you said, it's a question of time, and it's also how in-depth the audit is as such. And I'm quite pleased to see the QL optimisation there, obviously, for this coming year. Optimistic that we will you know, no pun intended, that we will get a good audit on that.
Thank you. Any other comments from committee members? If not, with that fairly minor, but I think important change, I think we can gladly approve what is approved. Thank you very much indeed. So now we're coming on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which are right at the end of the papers that we've received. If you have a hard copy, it'll be at the end of the file. So let's just go. I don't know if you had a chance to look through, but agenda item 10, the first page, the second page, which was largely the tax base, internal audit progress report. I note that we complimented the Treasury team in bold for getting another substantial rating, and Nigel looks happy. Then we have more internal audit reports. We had matters exempt from publication. Please, do you have some correction on the minutes?
A couple of questions, actually, really, and possibly a correction. Looking under 32, internal audit, income generation there. It's talking there, it mentions there that we were hoping a tender to go out in the next few weeks, and it was secured in the next 3 to 6 months. I mean, I just want to know, has that been achieved? And then on the service level agreement, the last bullet point there, Chair, has that been done? The service level agreement to develop the implementation of the new asset management system, if appropriate. Was it found to be not appropriate? And then the last thing, sorry, not a bullet point, the committee requested an update regarding the ongoing response to the audit findings and implementation of the asset management system from the corporate property team for the next committee meeting. I don't think we've had that this evening, Chair, have we?
Yeah.
We have we?
I'll let Nigel.
Yes, I mean, we had Emma Gubbins, who's in property to run through. Yeah,
That was it.
Yeah. Specifically in respect of the asset management system. So when we reviewed that, and we did so at the change board that is chaired by the Executive Director of Corporate Services, Tom Hook, and it was considered that as we were going out for a new cloud-based version of the Aggresso financial system, and as Emma said, the intrinsic nature of the two basically is that we basically get that project over the line first.
Okay.
That project is not scheduled to finish until the end of October. It's currently in progress at the moment, actually. And once we have done that, basically, we will move on to the asset system. That's why the recommendation for the asset system was pushed out to the 31st of March 24, not 23, 24, basically.
That's why I wanted, because it did mention.
No, that's right. That's right.
3 to 6 months. So we're looking at it next year.
Correct.
So a year, not
Correct.
3 to 6 months.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, that's good.
So maybe we can note that change to the minutes. Thank you for that. Anything else from other members? If not, then thank you, and I can eventually sign the minutes. Now we proceed to the exempt matters where we have to consider a resolution. I know there's a gentleman from the press who's interested to hear this discussion, but I will now read the paragraph which you do have in your papers. So first of all, in agenda item 7, it says, this item includes exempt information pursuant to paragraph 3 of part 1 of section 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. So if the council wishes to discuss matters related to the information set out in appendix 3 to the report, we have to pass a resolution to exclude the press and public from the meeting. And to see what the resolution is that we have to pass, this is under the agenda, under item 6. If the committee wishes to exclude the press and the public from the meeting during consideration of any aspects of the preceding agenda items, it will be necessary for the committee to pass a resolution in accordance with section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, specifying the grounds on which their presence could involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as described in specific paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, if and so long as in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. And at this point, I feel I should invite Lucy, since she understands these things slightly better than I do, if she could summarize the reason why this is being suggested as being proposed for exemption from publication and the exclusion of the public.
Latif. So the gentleman wishes to make an oral representation to the committee. It will be for the chair if he wishes to allow that. It would be for the report author to say why that the reports are in confidential session. And we also have legal representation online, Emma Faulkner, who is Emma Griffiths, who will speak to the constitution that it relates to. Okay.
Okay.
So can I just be clear, Chair? Does this mean that we can allow this young gentleman to just address the committee now? Because you actually have read out the clause that says that he should leave, but you're going to allow him to speak now.
Yes, I feel we should allow him to
That's
speak. That's part of the process. And then I think we should hear from the author of the report, and then also for Emma, and I was interested to know who Emma Faulkner was. I now gather she's changed her surname, and then maybe invite her to comment. So would you please like to come and sit up by a microphone and explain your reasoning? Yes.
Chairman, thank you very much for hearing this oral application. My name is Tom Seawarder. I'm the court and crime reporter on the Oxford Mail newspaper. Can I say at the outset, make two very short preliminary points. Firstly, I, on behalf of the Oxford Mail, completely accept the legal position and the authority that this committee and you have to exclude the public and press from this. That's not challenged. Second, very short point is that I'm rather fighting this battle with one hand tied behind my back and a blindfold over my eyes, in that I don't know, aside from paragraph 3 and I understand what that relates to, i.e. financial interests, what the financial interests are, whose they are, whether that's the local authorities, whether that's a private individual, whether that's Timmy's 50p pocket money that he gets every week, or it's because there's been a serious mismanagement of council taxpayers' finances. I would simply say that it is in the public interest for this committee to stop short of completely excluding public and press from this agenda item and consider other ways in which this could be dealt with. I can't even count the number of times that I have sat in a council meeting in my old patch in Swindon where councillors were warned against saying certain things because something might need to be held in private session, and they've stepped back from the brink, as it were, of my respectful submission. The same thing could be done here. I'm praying in support of that, what I've already said, and also the position, for example, in the criminal courts, where I'm far more familiar and far more comfortable, where a judge is encouraged to consider anything short of excluding the public and sitting in chambers, whether that's deferring publication, whether that's preventing the publication of certain details, or whether that's only excluding the public from a very small part of proceedings. As I say, I think it would be disproportionate for the whole of these proceedings to be held in public. I note in passing the agenda item on the last meeting of this committee that was held in public, the same reasoning was given for the exclusion of the public. The detail or the reason given for that in the minutes, draft minutes that have been published online, seem to refer to mismanagement of council finances. I would be concerned that the same has happened here. Cybersecurity is a hugely important issue, not just to this committee, but also to your constituents, the people who you represent. I note, I just need to get it up, that the annual internal audit plan for 2020-23, where the cybersecurity and the reasoning for wanting to audit cybersecurity is set out, states as follows. Due to the rapid evolution of cybersecurity threats, the Council and its partners may not be able to prevent an attack on infrastructure in an effective or timely manner, resulting in a breach of security. Therefore, we will review the IT infrastructure in place within the Council. The documents that you just considered and discussed raise very, very serious concerns about the management of that cybersecurity. Big red circles with the letter L, even if you don't have a glossary, are causes for concern. Causes for concern for this committee, but also for your constituents and the people you represent. By holding this session in private, it raises further question marks, I suspect, for your constituents, because, to quote another very wise man with glasses and a beard, a grey beard, chair, I suspect fear of a name increases fear of a thing itself. And while you might not be Albus Dumbledore, you are a particularly powerful man in this show. The point being is that the cloak of secrecy only raises suspicion, where the reason for wanting to hold it in private may well be fairly innocuous and quite boring. And if that is the case, then I'm sure there would be ways of avoiding referring to a single appendix in this report, or kicking me out only when that appendix is referred to. So that's the basis of the application. And as I say, I recognise entirely that the council and the councillors have the legal authority and power to hold this in private session. Thank you very much for hearing the application.
Thank you very much for stating your case. Can you press the button, of course, very clearly? I'm going to invite Rocco first to respond, and then Emma to come back on the legal side. We all have the benefit of having read the report so that we know what is considered confidential and what isn't. But maybe I can invite Rocco. And one thing maybe when we come to Emma, because I take your point, at least you would like to know something about what transpires from our discussion, and it may be possible, which isn't fully what you would like to see, but to have a summary of our discussions in a form that will tell you what you would like to know without breaching confidentiality. But I'll invite Rocco to speak, if he may.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening. Now, I echo your sentiments there, Councillor Fry, insofar as the report itself really is a technical, detailed report. So it has specifics of technical aspects, which in the public domain could be used by actors to try and test our infrastructure and our security. So effectively, the rationale from my perspective, as I understand it, is the specificity of the description of text within the report, which could be used by third parties to do that. The high level recommendations, to your point, Councillor, and to the gentleman journalist's point as well, could potentially in future reports be separated out into a very high level statement which has nothing technical in it. But in the case of this report, the specificity, as I say, of the technical descriptions is such that it could quite easily be used as a means of trying to gain ingress into the council systems, which I certainly would not recommend at all.
you. And Lucy's just reminding everyone, she just sent a chat, that we are still in public session and Rocco did not stray into confidential matters, but we must be aware of that while we have this discussion. Maybe Emma, would you like to respond? Do you think there is a middle path, and Rocco seemed to hint at that, where there could be a summary which would be acceptable, without straying into the areas he's just mentioned, which would be made available, so that, I mean, we can't do it now because we're going to be discussing the report, and you can't really do one without having discussed the report. But would that be a fair outcome in your opinion, Emma?
Yes, Chair, and I must apologise for making the rookie error of logging in to Zoom via my personal account. So my the name that I use outside work is displayed on the screen, so apologies for that. Now, as Rocco's outlined, this report has the potential to disclose information that really the council would not wish to be public in terms of its cybersecurity. And there is another provision in the Local Government Act that you may wish to consider when making your resolution, which is paragraph 7, which deals with the prevention or detection of crime. So in my opinion, that would be a more relevant provision to rely upon, given what Rocco has said. And as you've both said, going forward, I think this sort of report could be separated out so that only part of the information were considered to be exempt. But I don't think that that can happen in this case, because the report as written can't really be sort of divided up. I'm not sure if that helps you, but if you
I think you're explaining it's deep in the heart of what we have been reading as committee members. I mean, what I'm going to suggest, and I hope we can make a recommendation, that after our discussion, with appropriate consultation, in particular, I would suggest with Rocco, that we come up with a form of words to summarize the conclusions, which will be acceptable to someone who at least has made his case very cogently, and maybe make a point that in future, if similar issues arise, we try to make sure there is, as we tend to do in full council meetings, a publicly available document and an appendix, which all members of, say, the full council knows they cannot refer to in open discussion. I mean, that is what I'm going to suggest as the option. So a change in future, but in particular, an effort this time afterwards in consultation with Rocco. And maybe I'm going to ask if Lucy in her minutes can think of ways of noting things which do not breach confidentiality. If we could then minute that now and include that so that Tom can have it for future reference. No, thank you. Well, thanks for coming along, and you made your case very clearly. So in light of all the words I read to you, may we proceed into private session, please? Do I have